Ethan had always been close to his younger sister, Mia. She was the kind of person who brought joy into every moment, her laughter filling their small home like music. At only 22, Mia had dreams of becoming an artist, her sketchbooks filled with intricate designs and landscapes she hoped to bring to life one day. But all those dreams came to a sudden halt when she passed away in a tragic car accident. The funeral was devastating for Ethan. As the elder brother, he had always felt responsible for Mia, and her death left a void he couldn't fill. During the wake, Ethan sat quietly near her coffin, his eyes fixed on her peaceful face. She looked serene in her favorite white dress, her hands delicately folded over her chest. But there was something nagging him, a strange, unshakable feeling that something wasn't right. The doctors had ruled her death as accidental, but Ethan couldn't ignore the bruises on her arms or the faint scratch marks on her wrist. They weren't consistent with the accident report. He had asked the doctors and the funeral home workers about it, but their answers felt vague, rushed, and dismissive. At the funeral, Ethan overheard whispers among the staff, something about making it quick and no one asking too many questions. This only fueled his suspicions. His heart told him there was more to Mia's death than what he was being told. The night before the burial, as he sat in the dimly lit living room staring at Mia's picture, an idea struck him. It was desperate, perhaps even absurd, but Ethan couldn't let go of his doubts. He decided to place a hidden camera inside Mia's coffin. Maybe it was his way of staying connected to her, or maybe it was his last-ditch effort to find answers. Either way, he knew he couldn't rest until he uncovered the truth. With trembling hands, Ethan installed the small, discreet camera. He positioned it carefully so it wouldn't disturb Mia's peaceful appearance. His heart ached as he whispered, "Mia, I'm sorry for doing this, but I need to know the truth." The next day, as the coffin was lowered into the ground, Ethan stood silently, clutching the remote monitor connected to the camera. The weight of grief and the burden of his decision pressed heavily on his shoulders. Little did he know, the journey he had just started would unravel a series of events that would change everything he thought he knew about his sister's life and death. That night, Ethan sat in his room with the monitor on his desk. The screen displayed a live feed from inside Mia's coffin. It was dark and silent, just as he expected. He couldn't explain why, but he felt compelled to keep watching, as if the answers he sought would somehow reveal themselves. Hours passed and nothing happened. Ethan's mind wandered as he stared at the screen, a mix of grief and guilt consuming him. Was he being paranoid? Was his need for answers clouding his judgment? He nearly turned off the monitor, convincing himself this was a mistake, when something caught his eye. It was subtle at first, a faint shadow that moved across the screen. His breath hitched as he leaned closer, his eyes straining to make sense of it. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, but then he noticed it again, a distinct flicker of movement near Mia's hands. His heart raced. Determined to understand, Ethan rewound the footage to watch it again. There it was, a small, almost imperceptible shift. He couldn't believe his eyes. It wasn't Mia moving, but something near her. A faint glint caught his attention. Something metallic seemed to reflect light briefly near her folded hands. Confused, Ethan paused the video and zoomed in on the area. To his shock, there appeared to be a small object tucked into her palm, barely visible under her fingers. He hadn't noticed it at the wake or during the funeral. "What is that?" Ethan whispered to himself, his hands trembling as he replayed the footage again and again. The metallic object wasn't the only odd thing. A few moments later, the camera picked up a soft sound. It was faint, almost like a scraping noise, as if something was brushing against the wooden interior of the coffin. His pulse quickened. Was it interference? A glitch? Or was there something or someone tampering with the coffin? Ethan grabbed his phone and called his best friend Luke, who had been Mia's close confidant. Luke answered groggily, clearly half asleep. "Ethan, what's going on?" "It's 2 a.m. "I need you to come over," Ethan said urgently. "There's something you need to see. It's about Mia." Luke arrived within 20 minutes, still in his pajamas. Ethan showed him the footage, replaying the moments of movement and sound. Luke's face turned pale as he watched. This This doesn't make any sense, Luke said, his voice shaking. What's that in her hand? I didn't see anything like that at the wake. Neither did I, Ethan replied. But it's there now, and that noise, it's coming from inside. Luke stared at the screen, his expression a mix of fear and disbelief. Ethan, you don't think Someone's hiding something, Ethan interrupted, his jaw tightening. And I'm going to find out what it is. The next morning, Ethan couldn't wait any longer. With Luke by his side, he drove straight to the cemetery. The air was cold and still, the sun casting long shadows across the rows of gravestones. Ethan's heart pounded as they approached Mia's grave. He had barely slept the night before, his mind replaying the footage over and over. I still think we should talk to someone first, Luke said nervously as they stood by the fresh mound of soil. The cemetery staff, the police, anyone. Ethan shook his head. No one's going to believe me if I tell them I saw movement on a camera inside a coffin. We need proof first. With a deep breath, Ethan began to dig. The shovel felt heavy in his hands, and every scrape of metal against soil sent a chill down his spine. Luke stood nearby, glancing around nervously, half expecting someone to stop them. After what felt like an eternity, the shovel struck the wooden surface of the coffin. Ethan dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as he cleared the remaining dirt away. Carefully, he opened the lid, his heart racing. Mia's body lay exactly as it had been during the funeral, peaceful, still, and dressed in her favorite white dress. For a moment, Ethan felt a pang of guilt. Was he disturbing her rest for nothing? But then his eyes fell on her hands, and his breath caught. There it was, the metallic object. It was small and partially hidden under her folded fingers. Ethan hesitated, his hands hovering over hers. I'm sorry, Mia, he whispered, before gently prying her fingers apart. The object was a delicate, intricately designed pendant. It was unlike anything Ethan had seen before, shaped like a small key with strange symbols etched into its surface. It felt cold in his hand, almost unnaturally so. What is that? Luke asked, leaning closer. I don't know, Ethan said, turning the pendant over in his fingers. I've never seen her wear this before. And look at these symbols. They don't look random. Luke frowned. Do you think someone put it there after the wake? Why would she be holding it? Before Ethan could answer, something else caught his eye. Tucked into the folds of Mia's dress was a small, folded piece of paper. He carefully pulled it out, unfolding it with trembling hands. The paper was yellowed and old with faded handwriting scrawled across it. It wasn't in English, or any language Ethan recognized. The symbols on the pendant matched the writing on the paper. This is some kind of code, Ethan muttered, his mind racing. Or a message. Luke stared at the paper and pendant, his face pale. Ethan, this doesn't feel right. How did these get here? Who put them there? And why? I don't know, Ethan said, his voice resolute. But I'm going to find out. As they closed the coffin and began to refill the grave, Ethan's mind was filled with questions. The pendant, the symbols, the strange writing, they didn't belong to Mia. But whoever placed them there wanted them to remain hidden. Ethan's grief was now mixed with determination. His sister deserved the truth, and he wouldn't stop until he uncovered it. Back home, Ethan spread the pendant and the mysterious paper on the dining table. The symbols looked ancient, with intricate patterns that seemed almost purposeful in their design. Luke sat across from him, his laptop open, searching for any clues that might explain what they were looking at. Let's start with the pendant, Luke said. He snapped a few pictures of it and uploaded them to an online image search engine. If it's something common, it might show up here. While Luke worked, Ethan stared at the symbols on the paper. His fingers traced the delicate strokes, trying to make sense of their meaning. It wasn't a language he recognized, not letters, but symbols. Geometric shapes intertwined with curves, lines, and dots. Got something. Luke's voice broke through the silence. Ethan leaned over as Luke pointed at the screen. The pendant, it's not ordinary. Look at this. The screen displayed an image of a nearly identical pendant, labeled as an artifact connected to a secretive group known as the Keepers of Eternity. According to the brief description, the keepers were an ancient order rumored to guard sacred knowledge and objects. The pendant was a key, a literal and figurative one, said to unlock hidden truths. "This can't be real," Ethan muttered. "An ancient order? Sacred knowledge? That sounds like something out of a movie." "I know," Luke replied, "but the resemblance is undeniable. And look, there's a historian mentioned here who's written about these artifacts. Dr. Eleanor Grant. She's at the local university." Ethan didn't hesitate. "We're going to see her." An hour later, Ethan and Luke stood in Dr. Eleanor Grant's cluttered office. Books and artifacts were scattered everywhere, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and dust. Dr. Grant, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, examined the pendant and paper with an intensity that made Ethan's heart race. "This is remarkable," she said, finally looking up. "Where did you find this?" Ethan hesitated, then decided to be honest. "In my sister's coffin. It wasn't there before the funeral. Someone must have put it there." Dr. Grant's expression shifted, a mix of curiosity and concern. "This pendant is extremely rare. It's a key used by the Keepers of Eternity, an ancient group shrouded in mystery. Their purpose was to safeguard knowledge deemed too dangerous for the world. But these symbols," she gestured to the paper, "these aren't just random markings. They're part of a map or a set of instructions. I'll need time to decode this." Ethan's mind raced. "A map? To what?" Dr. Grant hesitated. "If the stories are true, it could lead to a hidden repository of knowledge or artifacts. Something powerful. Something people would kill to keep secret." Luke shifted uncomfortably. "So you're saying someone used Mia's funeral to hide this? Why?" Dr. Grant nodded. "It's possible. A coffin is a place no one expects to look. It's the perfect hiding spot for something valuable. Whoever placed this there didn't expect you to find it." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "So my sister's death might not have been natural?" Dr. Grant looked at him with a somber expression. "It's hard to say, but if this pendant and paper are involved, it's worth investigating further. Be careful, though. If someone went to these lengths to hide it, they won't be happy you found it." As Ethan and Luke left the university, Ethan's resolve hardened. Mia's death wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a mystery that needed solving, and he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The pendant and the paper became Ethan's obsession. Every waking hour was spent poring over the symbols, piecing together the fragments of the story Dr. Grant had shared. Meanwhile, Luke continued to dig online, searching for any connections to the Keepers of Eternity or similar cases. One evening, Ethan received a call from Dr. Grant. "Ethan," she began, her tone urgent, "I've made progress with the paper, but I need you to come to my office immediately. This is bigger than I imagined." Ethan grabbed the pendant and rushed to the university, Luke close behind. When they arrived, Dr. Grant's office was dimly lit, her desk covered in open books, old maps, and handwritten notes. She gestured for them to sit. "These symbols," she said, pointing to the paper, "they outline a location. It's not a complete map, but it references a hidden chamber beneath an old church on the outskirts of town. This church has long been rumored to be connected to the Keepers." "What's in the chamber?" Ethan asked. Dr. Grant hesitated. "If the legends are true, it holds knowledge that could change the course of history, writings, artifacts, things that the Keepers believed were too dangerous for humanity. And this pendant, it's the key to access it." Luke leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Why would someone hide this in Mia's coffin? Why her?" Dr. Grant looked at Ethan. "Your sister may have been involved without even knowing it. It's possible she came across something or someone connected to this group. Her death may not have been a coincidence." Ethan's stomach turned. "So someone might have killed her to protect this secret?" "It's a possibility," Dr. Grant said quietly. "But there's more. I found references to the Keepers' practices. They often used people, knowingly or not, to transport and conceal their artifacts. Your sister might have been caught up in something far larger than she realized." Before Ethan could respond, there was a knock at the door. The three of them froze. Dr. Grant motioned for silence, and Ethan's heart raced as the knock came again, louder this time. "Are you expecting anyone?" Luke whispered. Dr. Grant shook her head. Slowly, she moved to the door and opened it a crack. A man in a dark suit stood outside, his face shadowed in the dim hallway light. "Dr. Grant," the man said in a calm but authoritative voice, "we need to talk. Now." Dr. Grant turned back to Ethan and Luke, her face pale. "Go," she mouthed, gesturing toward the back door of her office. "Take the pendant and the paper. Don't stop." Ethan hesitated, but Luke grabbed his arm. "Come on," he hissed, dragging him toward the exit. As they slipped out into the night, Ethan's mind raced. Who was that man? And how had he found them? The answers felt closer than ever, but so did the danger. "Where now?" Luke asked as they climbed into the car. "To the church," Ethan said, clutching the pendant tightly. "If this is what Mia died for, I'm going to find out why." The church stood on the edge of town, its silhouette illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. Its worn stone walls and overgrown yard gave it an air of abandonment, though Ethan knew it held the answers he sought. Clutching the pendant and the paper, he stepped out of the car with Luke by his side. "This place gives me the creeps," Luke muttered, glancing around. "Are we sure about this?" Ethan didn't answer. He walked up the crumbling stone steps and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The interior was dark and silent, with faint moonlight streaming through the stained glass windows. Dust swirled in the air and the scent of damp stone filled his nostrils. Using his phone's flashlight, Ethan scanned the floor and walls, searching for any markings or clues. Luke followed, keeping an eye on the entrance. "Here," Ethan said, stopping in front of the altar. A faint outline of symbols, similar to those on the paper, was etched into the stone floor. They formed a circular pattern, and at the center was a small, round indentation, the exact size of the pendant. Ethan hesitated, his hands trembling as he placed the pendant into the indentation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low rumble, the stone beneath the altar began to shift, revealing a hidden staircase descending into darkness. Luke whistled softly. "This is straight out of a movie." Ethan took a deep breath and stepped onto the stairs. The air grew colder as they descended, the faint sound of dripping water echoing around them. At the bottom, they found a large, dimly lit chamber. Flickering torches lined the walls, casting dancing shadows across the space. In the center of the room was a stone table surrounded by ancient artifacts, scrolls, books, and strange metallic objects. Ethan's gaze was drawn to a large, intricate mural on the wall behind the table. It depicted a group of figures holding glowing objects, their faces obscured by hoods. "What is this place?" Luke asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan walked to the table and picked up one of the scrolls. The text was written in the same symbols as the paper, but the illustrations showed images of devices and maps. One scroll depicted a burial ritual, with instructions on hiding certain objects in coffins. "It's a guide," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "The keepers use this chamber to plan and store their secrets. Mia must have come across something they wanted to hide." As he scanned the scrolls, his heart sank. One page contained a list of names, all written in symbols except for one. Mia. "She was on their list," Ethan whispered. "They knew about her." Before he could process what it meant, a loud clang echoed from the staircase. Someone was coming. Luke grabbed Ethan's arm. "We need to leave, now." Ethan clutched the scroll and pendant, his mind racing. Whatever they had uncovered, it was clear that someone didn't want them to leave with it. As they bolted up the stairs, the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, the danger closing in. Ethan and Luke burst out of the hidden staircase into the main hall of the church, their breaths ragged and hearts pounding. Behind them, the echo of hurried footsteps grew louder. They didn't stop to look back. Ethan clutched the scroll and pendant tightly as they raced toward the door. As they reached the churchyard, two shadowy figures emerged from the darkness, blocking their path. Both wore dark suits, their expressions cold and unyielding. One of them stepped forward, raising a hand. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," the man said, his voice calm yet menacing. "Hand it over, and this ends here." Ethan's grip on the pendant tightened. "This belonged to my sister," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "I'm not giving it up." The man's expression hardened. "Your sister was involved in something she didn't understand. She was a courier, a means to an end. The pendant and the scroll aren't yours to keep. If you don't hand them over, there will be consequences." Luke stepped forward, his voice trembling with anger. "You used her? You're saying you got her killed for this?" The second man, taller and more imposing, spoke. "Her death was an accident, but your interference could lead to far worse outcomes." Ethan's mind raced. If these men were connected to the Keepers of Eternity, they would stop at nothing to retrieve the pendant and scroll. But he couldn't let Mia's death be in vain. She had unknowingly carried something of immense value, and now it was up to him to protect it. "We're leaving," Ethan said firmly, stepping back. "And you're not stopping us." The taller man reached into his coat, pulling out a small device that emitted a faint blue light. Before he could activate it, a loud voice boomed from behind Ethan. "Step away!" Ethan turned to see Dr. Grant standing at the church gate, flanked by 2 police officers. She had come after them, realizing they might need help. The men in suits hesitated, clearly weighing their options. After a tense moment, they stepped back into the shadows. "This isn't over," one of them said before disappearing into the darkness. Dr. Grant hurried over to Ethan and Luke, her expression a mix of relief and urgency. "Are you two all right?" Ethan nodded, though his hands were still trembling. "We found the chamber," he said, holding up the scroll. "And I think we know why Mia was involved." Dr. Grant glanced at the scroll and pendant, her eyes wide. "This is incredible," she said. "But you've put yourselves in danger. These artifacts, this knowledge, is something people are willing to kill for. We need to ensure they're protected." The group drove back to Dr. Grant's office, where they carefully documented everything they had found. The scrolls revealed the true purpose of the Keepers of Eternity: to safeguard knowledge that could disrupt or harm humanity. The pendant was more than a key. It was a symbol of trust, passed down to those chosen to protect their secrets. As dawn broke, Ethan sat quietly staring at the pendant in his hand. He thought of Mia, her laughter, her dreams, her kindness. She had been caught in something far bigger than herself, but she had unknowingly played a part in preserving something extraordinary. "I won't let her be forgotten," Ethan said softly. "She deserved better, but at least now I know the truth." Dr. Grant placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Your sister's story won't end here. She'll be remembered for what she helped protect." Ethan nodded, a sense of closure washing over him. He didn't have all the answers, but he had something even more valuable: the truth. And that truth, no matter how dangerous, was worth fighting for.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.